Video games are a magical yet frustrating medium of entertainment. As a kid, you spend all day at school thinking about booting up whatever game has somehow captured your entire attention and playing it for hours on end. Where's that gone? Now going to work, all you can think about is getting through whatever customer is giving you a hard time or whatever meaningless and mundane task you have to complete for the 100th time. But you don't think, I can't wait to play Mario Galaxy. Instead, you think, I can't wait to go home so I can relax, rest, and enjoy myself. When did video games change from something that we could use to relax, to rest, and enjoy, to something that genuinely feels like effort to go through at times? Although the games you like are still fun and enjoyable, they're hardly an escape anymore. I don't know if that resonates with anyone, but I'd like to think that I'm not alone in that feeling. Laziness in Proverbs 24:33-34 is referred to as something that leads to selfishness and a furthering from God. However, video games themselves aren't inherently harmful and don't inherently feed into laziness either. Overindulgence in them is what leads to the sin, as with anything. We also see that if you overindulge in the gifts that God has given us in this life, such as the money or whatever else He has given us, if we overindulge in that rather than praising the Lord for that, then we're not going to be bearing any fruit, and we're going to be led down to sin. Video games can lead to a sense of release at the end of the day, or they can be a distraction from anxiety. They always hopefully provide enjoyment, and if you use them for the glory of God, then what's the harm of playing them? It becomes a perspective, intention, and action problem, not a content problem, in most cases. Sometimes the games themselves have a lot of sinful content in them, but that's an entirely different issue. It's scary to admit that games aren't fun anymore. It feels like you're giving up, and it feels like a part of you that used to be what kept you going is now gone and just dead. That's why we can't allow them to be what drives us to be successful and to live, because they aren't eternal, as opposed to God and His kingdom, who is eternal. We're told in Matthew 6:33 to seek that kingdom above all else, and everything else will be provided. That verse specifically is talking about a shift in perspective towards God, which applies to how we should treat everything in our lives. Video games are a source of enjoyment, not of joy. God is our source of joy. You still want video games to bring you that enjoyment, but oftentimes they don't anymore. You miss and you hold on to the desire to recapture that feeling that you once had. However, when your desire changes in this way, it's a good sign that your perspective and source of happiness and purpose in life has changed. And it's not like you don't enjoy video games anymore, but you also sometimes feel like you're getting nothing out of it and you could be doing much more productive things with your time. Something you enjoy and have fun with, you should always want to do and always have the energy to do, though, right? It takes some mental simulation, sure, and there are some mentally taxing games because of competitiveness or other aspects, but it still just doesn't scratch the itch of fun and relaxing sometimes, depending on the game. Maybe part of that is the laziness that overindulgence in video games can promote, like I was talking about earlier, but I like to think that the real reason is something else, and I'm going to cover that later in the video. Let's take a look at Souls-likes, one of my favorite genres of all time. Dark Souls 3 is one of the best games ever created, from its rich storyline to its incredibly thought-provoking and deep world building, to an extremely well-executed combat system and an end to a story that was built up for years over 2 previous games and many DLCs. Dark Souls and FromSoft in general have had their praises sang for years now. They're known to be difficult and sometimes a slog to push through and to get to the other side. There's a reason for the memes of "this is the Dark Souls of classes," or whatever hard thing you might want to compare it to. These games have such a great addictive quality to them, and there's no denying that. They're extremely fun to anyone who enjoys sucking it up and admitting they have to put a little bit of thought into the gameplay, rather than just turning their brains off. But in this scenario, that's exactly the problem. There's a time and a place for that, but the focus here is trying to recapture the feeling of games being something to wind down with and enjoy. The game is fun and deep and immersive, some of the best game design out there. But when you get home from a long, mentally taxing day at work, you don't want to use your brain even more. No, you want to rest it. Sometimes when we're walking through a storm in our life of anxiety or a hardship we may be going through, it feels hopeless. We have to remind ourselves that the same God we serve when everything is sunshine and rainbows is there in the storms. Although we might sometimes think we're playing Dark Souls and living our day-to-day life, we know that God is still faithful. So, while Dark Souls is a good reminder of this for our walk with God, it ends up not being what we need sometimes when we need the rest and the peace. So, let's look at the other end of the spectrum. Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, this game is extremely easy, just like many other Pokemon games. You can just use your starter through the whole thing and you'll be fine. Add on top of that pretty easy and relatively early access to legendaries due to the Dynamax adventures in the DLC, and you can breeze through it in an afternoon without putting any thought into it. Sometimes we end up living this way, however. We go on autopilot, serving God and thinking about him only when it's convenient. But Colossians 3:23 tells us to serve the Lord full-heartedly and let every action be done for the Lord to glorify him, because it is him that we serve. We're meant to serve him even when it's hard and easier to just go through the motions. Pokemon at its core has always been a fun franchise for many people. I mean, let's be realistic here, it's the #1 grossing media franchise of all time. While the devs might not always give the players what they want, which is a topic for another day, the core gameplay, when it's done right, is still very fun. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald succeeded with this very well, introducing a new gimmick to the battle system, double battles, that offered an entirely new set of strategies to use. It fundamentally changed how competitive is played to this day. And it's been, what, 22 years now? And it offered enough challenge to warrant getting other Pokemon, even if it was still entirely doable and relatively easy, to beat the game with just a starter. In this case, doing what's easy once again is not the most beneficial thing to do. We're called to do what's difficult in life because it is the right thing to do. Our flesh gets in the way and makes what we should be doing difficult because it goes against our desires. So choosing to use just the starter makes the experience not as good, but the new Pokemon introduced, as well as the new mechanic in the battles themselves, make you want to actually strategize and want to do it the right way. Sword and Shield provides little to no need for strategy or motivation to do things right. You move a joystick and you spam A, and that's the entire gameplay loop. So, on one hand, we have a game with genuine fun gameplay and deep enticing world building, but it's hard to understand that world and requires a lot of focus to enjoy that gameplay. It reminds us of our storms and reminds us of where our focus should be. And on the other hand, we have a game that requires little to no brain power, but in turn feels dead and has nothing engaging to offer the player. It encourages the easy option out of you, but it expects the right option, reminding us that the world will push you to the easy option, but we're expected to do what is right. In both of these, we see the problem of either having to throw ourselves at a wall to conquer what's ahead, or not having anything to conquer at all and not accomplishing anything. In a similar vein, this is how we often treat sin. A friend of mine once told me he was struggling to not give in to sin out of respect of his privacy. I'm not going to say who he was or the specific sin he was struggling with, but he told me he was tallying up how long it had been since he had given into the temptation and that he was proud of himself for going so long. But he also said every time he broke a record, he would end up giving in a day or two later. He told me he was trying to think of not giving into it, but it wasn't working for him. We either try so hard to avoid giving into it and be a good little Christian, or we don't try at all and act passive towards it. And the same person can be too active to one sin and too passive to another. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try to avoid sin, and in fact, I'm saying the opposite. We should avoid sin whenever we can, but we're told to deny it and follow Jesus. We have to shift our focus and perspective to him who has conquered all sin. Let's accept that power that he has given us and follow him and love him. So then, where's the in-between that makes you want to play games? Where's the game that changes everything to make you think of it when you think of enjoying your time and resting? The answer is different for everyone, but mine's Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild came out in an interesting time of my life, and at first I had pretty weird feelings on it. At the time I was in 5th grade, and by the time I had gotten it, my grandpa had just recently been taken to the hospital, where he would then go back and forth for the next 5 years until he eventually passed away. Playing this game on the way to spend time with him and eventually at his house whenever I'd go over for the day are some of my best childhood memories to this day. For me, part of my love for this game stems from my love for my grandpa, who I miss dearly, but through this game, I have even more ways to remember him, which I count as a massive blessing. But when it first came out, it was nearly impossible to get a Switch. I don't know if anyone remembers trying to get one, but I would spend entire nights on my phone hoping and searching for a way to get one. It's the only thing I could think about getting. Since it was my entire focus, I wasn't exactly extremely happy that I didn't have one. I wasn't too mature in my faith, or even by human standards, because I was in 5th grade. But looking back on this experience, God has used it to shape me and help shift my focus and my desires. I watched all the reveal trailers at least 100 times and tons of unboxing videos to just to get a bit of that enjoyment of having a Switch for myself. At first though, I didn't care anything about any Zelda games. I always thought they were stupid and they never looked fun to me. They weren't baby games like Pokemon and Mario. They were more mature and more gritty. Of course, saying that now that I've played and love so many of the games sounds extraordinarily stupid. I based the entire franchise off of the Twilight Princess box art. Originally, I wanted the Switch because Minecraft would be on it, and Mario Kart and Mario Odyssey looked like a lot of fun, and I knew there would eventually be a new Smash game, and I've always loved that franchise. So, going into the launch of the Switch, I was extremely excited for just these 3 games alone. But then one day, after seeing the trailer for like 6 times that day already, the Breath of the Wild section caught my eye for some reason. All of a sudden, the few seconds of the trailer I ignored for the past few weeks stood out to me. It looked freeing, it looked like an adventure, something fun that challenged me but still gave me the ability to have fun and progress in it without using too much of my brain. As a 5th grader, I didn't think about any of that though. Overall, I would say that Breath of the Wild is something that I play as a comfort game nowadays. Something that I play while reflecting on what God has done in my life and taught me through His Word. And now I get to make this video about it and use it for His glory. Eventually, I got a Switch after searching for a few months, and I loved it. It did genuinely satisfy that desire, and to this day it still does, though it's the Switch 2 now. Now, it brings me joy because it helps me focus on God, as well as providing the enjoyment and fun that games often do. I played a bit of Breath of the Wild at first and thought it was fun, but I never really got all that far. I didn't even make it to Vah Ruta until after a month of playing off and on. Instead, I was entirely encapsulated by Mario Kart, which is weird because I didn't have any friends to play it with, so I just did solo races against CPUs, and that's what I always did as a kid on my 3DS, so hey, if it works, it works. For some reason though, I never could get Breath of the Wild out of the back of my mind. So I went back to it and started a new save. This time, it all hit. Opening cinematic played, and I was ready. I saw Link get out of that bath and started walking around to get the Sheikah Slate. Again, I had done all of this before, but it was different this time. Everything felt whimsical, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it had that same Nintendo magic that all of their games have. I made my way through the cave and got to the cliff edge where I saw the overview of Hyrule, and got genuine goosebumps from it. It was huge. It was beautiful. There was a massive volcano in the back, some weird bird thing flying, a castle. There was a mountain split at the peak, and there was just so much more that I could see. And I could go to any of it and explore it. I could climb all over it. I could go into the little buildings that were all scattered all across Hyrule. I could explore the ruins and just see what civilization used to look like. And I could go to the big castle and see what was up with all the weird purple flying stuff. I've played through this game 9 times now and even 100% completed it on Master Mode. And I still get teary every time I watch it. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the entire adventure through Hyrule and what I specifically did and where I went, but I will tell you about the experience itself. I found it extremely hard at first, so I had to really focus on what I was doing, but it was never overbearing. It was just enough to keep me engaged, but not so much to exhaust me even further. I wasn't anxious about every little action I made and how that would either spell my doom or lead to success. But my actions still felt as though they had weight, because they still did impact the gameplay experience. In our walks with God, we often stress so hard on what the next step is, instead of just where He has us right now. We're so focused on, what am I going to do next, Lord? What do you have for me next? Instead of, thank you for what you've put me in for now. I'm going to do my best to love you and to serve your people where I'm at right now. And we can't be having this mindset of what's next all of the time. Yes, we need to look to God for what He wants us to do in the future, but we also have to appreciate Him and appreciate what He's done in the now. And I'm going to speak more on that later in the video. Each enemy has different tiers of red to gold in Master Mode, their own attack pattern and their own aggression level, and they all have a basic sideways swing, an overhead jumping slash, a rock throw, and some of them have bows, big swords, spears, shields, or just normal single-handed swords. They sometimes will throw explosive barrels at you, and a moblin might sometimes pick up a bokoblin and throw it at you. It's a super basic template of a combat system, but with all the abilities you've got, it has the potential to be something great. Now, I'm not saying anything revolutionary here at all, but what makes all of this so good and fit into that mold that I was talking about earlier? Well, I'm gonna do the typical YouTuber thing of making you wait till the end of the video to see that. Now, the things you learn from the Bokoblins pass to every other enemy if you learn it the right way. The things you learn in storms are going to help you to avoid future anxiety in storms throughout your walk with God. You have to know how to use Link rather than how to avoid the enemy. And in a similar way, you have to know how to trust Christ rather than how to specifically navigate each storm. The avoiding of enemies is going to change, and it's going to come with fighting them. Likewise, the endurance through a storm is going to build character, and it's going to build your trust in God. So there's also the Shrine Combat riddled throughout Hyrule, where you're going to go in and fight the little guardians, learn new combat techniques, or refine what you already do know through a slight mix-up in the room. Now, they're pretty cool, but after you've played for 100 hours, you're pretty comfortable with the combat system, I would hope. And so one enemy that is relatively easy, and it's the same thing every time, it does get dull. But if you're a new player, they're trials to overcome, and they're very helpful for teaching you new things. And in Kakariko Village, where you would encounter what they would hope would be your first one, you get to learn the technique of Flurry Rush, which makes every combat encounter in the game trivial. If you jump back or to the side at just the right time, time will slow down and you can hit the enemy like 4 or 5 times. It just depends on the weapon. It's a completely free opening. Can't take any damage from it, and you just get free damage. And now it does deal damage to your weapons, which the durability on weapons is a whole different issue that I'm not going to discuss in this video. But this can be abused so easily, and it makes the game laughably easy sometimes. It takes Lionel fights and Thunderblight Ganon from some of the most annoying fights to one of the most rewarding fights for learning the systems. When you're in scripture and letting God change your heart and your desires, you'll have more weapons to fight through the storm. You'll have more of these combat techniques, per se, in order to get through the storm. In a sense, trusting he has control over it and laying it down at his feet is your Flurry Rush of faith. Because ultimately, when we surrender and we put it into God's hands, trusting that he will take care of it, that makes whatever we're going through trivial, because if you stack it up against God, you're just going to see how much greater God is than whatever you're going through. And not to say that what you're going through is something that we should just write off. No, it's hard. But we have a God who's greater than that, who can get us through that, who, when we place our faith in him, is going to guide us. So when we do love him, we just grow all the more closer to him, and our lives just get that much better. Ultimately, trusting he will get you through it, trusting he has a plan, and trusting that he will be glorified through it and waste none of it will set you up pretty well to endure anything you go through. Then all you need to do is dwell in his presence and meditate on his word he has blessed us with. Now, all of that sounds super easy, doesn't it? Now, I say that jokingly, but in reality, it should be our natural thought process. Yet, oftentimes, it isn't, because we have this stupid thing called our flesh. And that's part of our answer to the big question of what makes Breath of the Wild feel so different, and it's that it's rewarding. But also, it reminds you to learn the tools and to use them. The work you put into seeing how the different elements of combat interact with one another, building on one another, and feeling like they have a natural flow pays off. Everything reacts to itself in this combat system in a way that makes you think that any of this could happen to anyone in the world, but it just so happens to be reacting to what Link is doing. It isn't dependent on Link, but rather itself. Getting through these trials and tribulations is dependent on God and not our own strength. The one who remains constant, the same yesterday, today, and forever. And praise the Lord isn't based on us, because we would fail every time, because we're imperfect and we're broken without him. It doesn't feel like you have abilities that you, the player, are comboing together in the game, but rather, you're reacting to what the world is throwing at you, and you're focused on how to use what's around you, rather than what you can do, which ultimately makes for a more engaging experience. Elden Ring also does well with this. With every boss being different, you still have to understand your character's weapon and spell they're using. You have to understand God and his presence to be successful. You have to dwell on his word and his hand and everything. However, in this case, bosses' attacks and consumption of your stamina with the combo of rolling, parrying, blocking, and attacking is completely different for each boss, leading you to have to learn how to execute these things completely differently for each boss in order to be successful. Breath of the Wild does a better job of illustrating that the success is dependent on the constant rather than the change. It's dependent on God rather than us, and adapting to what's going on around us. It's a dynamic system that is constantly growing on itself, but there's only a point of mastery once you've experienced the game all the way through at least once. This is in direct opposition to mastering the game as you go, and by the late game already being in that state, letting you feel as though you can go on a power trip. But you have to work your way to that, making it rewarding. We only go through this earthly life one time. You don't get a new game plus. We can't get to the end of it and then go through it again and do better the next time. The next time is eternity, and it's either going to be with God in heaven or it's going to be separated from him forever. We have to make that choice and using what we learn as we go and leaning more and more on him. Again, I love Dark Souls and Elden Ring and all of the Soulsborne games and have many great things to say about them, but that's going to have to be a separate video, and we'll revisit this rewarding concept later. Through playing the game, you'll get 4 combat abilities that make things easier, and one of these can be used for traversal as well. To get them, you have to go through the main story and explore just a bit, but they're pretty straightforward to complete. Obtaining all 4 isn't required to beat the game. In fact, you don't have to get any of them. You can get Mipha's Grace, which is a revive that gives you absorption hearts and a full heal. Daruk's Protection, a shield that will automatically parry any attacks, but in our case, we have God as a shield around us, as we see in Psalm 3:3. Urbosa's Fury, a charge attack that will summon lightning all around you, and the longer you hold it, the stronger it will get, although you are vulnerable while charging it. And Revali's Gale, a wind gust you can use to get into the air and glide. While gliding, you can also use your bow and shoot in slow motion. These come from the Divine Beasts, and the base game has 4, but the DLC introduces a 5th one, which gives you a really cool motorcycle. Once you've played for a little while, all of these things become second nature. All you think about is, what do I use here? And you end up reacting to the world and using it to succeed. Again, I know I sound like a broken record here, but repetition is the friend of wisdom. The love of Christ, the praising of him, and the scriptures we have written in our hearts are the tools we use to get through the storm. We trust that using what God has given us will help us focus on him and recognize that he will ultimately deliver us. In this way, we see that the aspect of it being second nature is still fun and engaging, using your brain, but not overloading it with decisions and thoughts that remove the rest aspect. It comes naturally, and you're not focused on every little step of how you get to the result you need. You're focused on trusting that you'll get through the fight and know what to do and just doing the things you need to do. In a similar way, God works in our lives, not showing us every little step we need to take sometimes. That's why it's called faith, because we need to have faith in him to reveal the opportunities he wants for us, and that ultimately his hand will guide us through to the end, which is eternity with him when we surrender our lives to him and recognize him as the Lord of our lives. And here's just a little illustration of that. We see all the time in the New Testament the illustration of Christ being a shepherd and us being sheep. You have the parable in Luke talking about the lost sheep and how God went after the one. Now, I like to think of our walk with Christ sometimes as we are in this herd of sheep following Christ, and he is guiding us to where the next pasture is for us to eat grass from. But sometimes we're following him and we make a wrong step. We go off the path just a little. Focus on God and trusting him, and not on what every individual step you take needs or doesn't need to be, or when it needs to be. Trust that he will correct you if what you do isn't in his will or timing, and trust that his will and timing are both far better than yours in every way, and they will always be far better than yours. Now let's jump to another aspect of the game, the puzzles. They can be very thought-provoking, and I still struggle with some of them even to this day. Some are knowledge-based and others are skill-based. Some mix the two, and those are the best ones. Most of the really good puzzles take place in the 136 shrines. These, like everything else, are entirely optional except for the first 4, but you're doing yourself a huge disservice if you don't experience all or most of these. The same thing goes with the game's 4 Divine Beasts. Now, if you played any other Zelda game but somehow haven't tried this one yet, these are like the normal dungeons and temples, but they're honestly worse. This is something most people can agree on, and in this game, worse doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. In fact, I still enjoy them a lot, but these don't entirely work the same way. As opposed to offering you a new item to use for the rest of the game, this is where you get those combat abilities from earlier. The dungeons provide a unique experience, while unlike the other Zelda games, they aren't extremely intricately woven labyrinths that build and change on themselves as you progress. They do still feel coherent and challenging while being fun. They leave something to be desired for Zelda fans, but for someone who has never played a Zelda game before, they get the job done. Now, most of them would be the equivalent of 2 or 3 rooms of the Great Deku Tree from Ocarina of Time, and they're far less annoying than the N64 version of the Water Temple from that game. But realistically, that's saying something about how great of a game Ocarina of Time is, rather than how great the dungeon design is in Breath of the Wild. But that puts into perspective what the focus of Breath of the Wild was and what the focus of Ocarina was. They didn't have the same goal, the same objective, and that's okay. They're different games. They shouldn't. They're in completely different genres too. And so it's fine. It works for Breath of the Wild, and they did well with it. I think they get too much flack in all honesty. Some shrines have you do some pretty crazy things. One of them has you roll a snowball down a hill to break open a massive door. Some have the combat shrines like we talked about earlier, and one of them makes you take a picture of a broken artifact that comes from a different game, Twilight Princess. Some straight up are just you have to find the shrine and there's treasure in it, and that's the entire shrine. But by far the best one has you go on an island and strips you of all your gear, and you have to show true mastery of all the game's mechanics in order to beat and complete the shrine. Or you can just choose it by smuggling gear on the island. We shouldn't treat anything in our lives, such as homework or work or anything else, in this way where we look for an easy way out where we can cheese it and not do it by the rules. And sometimes that can become a trial for us. So I like to view these shrines and the dungeons as a trial, a tribulation, or a storm that I might be going through. And I have to use whatever I already have to get to the end. At the end of it, I'm going to get a new tool, whether that be more trust in God, whether that be a verse, whether that be a hymn to dwell on, or a contemporary worship song, whatever. Just something that reflects on who God is and his character. Usually for me, I use what I already have, but by the end of whatever I'm experiencing, I come out with more trust in the Lord, as well as some of those other things that I was mentioning a second ago. This is exactly what we're talking about when we read James 1:2-4, which says to consider it joy when we go through trials, because it brings us closer to God and it makes us more reliant on him, and therefore makes us stronger and reflect him more, because he is strong when we are weak. The more of ourselves we give away to God, the more we become like him, and therefore the stronger we are because of him, not because of us, because there's less of us. These shrines are pretty much everywhere, and sometimes they aren't immediately present, so you have to do a little bit of searching, or you'll have to complete a side quest for them. While some are definitely better than others, it's always rewarding because everything builds on itself. It's all fun while maintaining that challenge. It provides rest and enjoyment at the same time. The divine beasts also give you a heart container. To get to some of these shrines, you do have to go exploring, but that brings us to our next and final area, actually. Everywhere you look is something you can interact with. Whether you climb it, have a snowball shadow cover up a tiny circle, or you just move one rock to be in line with a very suspicious looking circle of rocks, there is something enjoyable to do around every corner. You see the beauty of the world, and it just makes you want to dwell in it. And honestly, that's an amazing anxiety killer, and it helps you to worship God if you apply that to real life. Looking at the world he has created brings me so much peace, knowing that he had his hands on it while making all of it. And again, the same God who created all of that, all of what we know, is the same God who loves you. If you feel that God hates you because you're living in sin, then I have great news for you. You're wrong. He doesn't. He died for all of us while we were still sinners, Romans 5:8, and he demonstrated that love for us out of no obligation. He did it because he wanted to. He wanted us to be with him. Living sinfully is harmful, yes, but Christ can set you free, and he will, as long as you accept him and love him and recognize that he loves you and that he wants to do that for you. God created all of what we know, created everyone on the planet, and decided he wanted to create one of you too. Then, out of a desire to know you and for all of us to know him as well, he made a way for every single one of us to know him. Our sin separates us from God, but Christ took that sin on for us, and we no longer have to live in that. We can live in the peace and the love of Jesus, and you can realize all of that and remind yourself of all of that by just looking at what his hands have made. As amazing and revolutionary of a game Skyrim is, it suffers from the problem of too much with little to no substance. Now, some may disagree with that, but I feel the hundreds of dungeons don't provide enough substance to warrant littering one everywhere. Every single one of them feels the same, with little to no reward, and many of the quests in that game have you going back and forth to the same dungeon over and over again for no good reason, in all honesty. I mean, sure, there's something to do everywhere in the game, but that doesn't mean that what there is to do is quality and what there is to do has meaning. And of course it's that way, because we're talking about two games in the open world genre, which is such an open concept that at this point, pretty much every AAA game on the market is developed as a open world game. Part of that is because of the success of Skyrim, and honestly, in more recent times, Breath of the Wild has made that impact too. What Breath of the Wild does right, though, is making even the least rewarding task fun and enjoyable. Skyrim is rough, it's realistic, it's gritty, and it's muddy. Breath of the Wild feels whimsical with its cel-shaded art style that maintains beauty throughout the entire game, especially with the upgrade from the Switch 2. Now, that comes down to preference, that comes down to perspective, and you also do have to consider that Skyrim is a game that was made in 2011, Breath of the Wild was made in 2017. So, while they're both, at this point, pretty old games, Skyrim is a lot older, coming up on 20 years, which is insane to think about. But ultimately, in the situation of looking for the relaxation, Breath of the Wild fits that mold much better. And at the end of the day, you're just an elf going through a broken kingdom and trying to make things right as you go, but you get sidetracked by 900 little green guys trying to give you seeds. Alright, I gotta talk about them. I can't avoid them any longer. The Koroks are an interesting part of this game. I've collected all 900 and it was pretty fun. It was truly rewarding in my eyes, but that's because of my intrinsic motivation rather than my extrinsic motivation. I had fun because of the journey of finding them all and the satisfaction of one day being able to say, hey, I did everything in Breath of the Wild. And as a kid, that's all I wanted to be able to say one day, and now I can, which feels amazing. These guys practically give you nothing. The first 459 seeds can be exchanged for extra weapon, bow, and shield slots, but all the rest of them are low-key useless. You get a golden pile of poop at the end of it saying, good job, you just wasted a whole lot of time and you're an idiot for it. The devs have even said they never intended for people to get all of them, but they knew people would, so they included Hestu's gift to troll us, and I'm honestly okay with that. I knew what I was getting into, I knew the reward, and I knew how long it would take. I didn't care, because it was fun to do, and it was relaxing. It provided enjoyment and rest, and on top of that, it rewarded me because of my perspective on it rather than what the game had for me. In that, we see that striving after the reward doesn't lead to any fulfillment when the reward is of this world. The reward was within the game, but my personal reward was outside of the game. If we do things in this life for the sake of anything other than God, or for serving his people, or for our love for God, then we're ultimately not going to be satisfied, and we're kidding ourselves. So what's so different then about Breath of the Wild from other open worlds that make it worth going through? I've been asking this question the whole time, and I think part of it is the game for sure. They did a wonderful job with that, but I think that the main issue is us. The game expects you to naturally have curiosity, and it puts things in front of you constantly, yet it still guides you where you're quote-unquote supposed to go. All of the best parts of the game draw you in from hours away and keep you wondering about them until you finally give in and go look at them. There's a mountain that glows some nights called Satori Mountain. On that mountain, when it's glowing, is a special mount that can't be registered in stables. When you get up there in time, the reward is honestly kind of bad. Just a mount that kind of sucks in all honesty, and it can't be ridden once you get off of it, can't be registered at stables, nothing. But there's just something whimsical about that light emitting from the mountain, about getting up there and seeing such a beautiful environment with a cherry blossom tree and such a peaceful creature just enjoying his time to be around, however minuscule it might be. It's beautiful because you can't always see it, and after you've seen it for the first time, it's just not worth going back to. It's a one-time experience that can never be replicated, and that's the reward. You'll never have the same experience with it again because it provides no realistic functional value. It only provides a pleasing moment outside of the game itself. The developers bank on this content being found through either the player being curious about what they've heard from the NPCs or from seeing the light in the world. So it's something you could go the entire game without ever experiencing because of your perspective on the game. That's where the player aspect of it comes in. You only get as much out of it as you put in, and if you don't care about naturally exploring your questions of what's this? What does it do? Who built this? Then you get nothing out of the experience. I'm not going to tell anyone how to play a game. You spent $60 to $80 on this game, so you can play it however you want to. But I'm always going to recommend people to play this and any other game in a way that explores your natural sense of wonder. Speeding to Ganon beats the game for sure, but by doing that you really haven't played the game because the game is the journey to Ganon. I'm also not saying you should do every little thing that you see. I've done that and it's just not worth it. Most of it is a lot of fun to me to do, but that's only because my reward, my enjoyment was the experience itself and then being able to say that I had done it, not the reward at the end of the little trophies that you get. The motivation and the enjoyment of a game ultimately lies on you. You can't expect a game to make you excited for something that doesn't excite you. If a game is highly praised, but it doesn't appeal to what specifically excites you, then you're not gonna enjoy it. And guess what? That's okay. So there's the answer. Why don't games provide the same sense of desire to play when we get home? Because we're not giving ourselves that. We're giving ourselves, I hate what I'm doing right now. I can't wait to be done with it. We're focusing on the future, focusing on what is to come rather than what we're in currently. With that being said, we can learn that we must dwell in God's presence through everything and rely on him entirely, because without him, we're nothing. He loves us enough to let us know him, to let us worship him, to let us praise him, to learn about him, and just love him. And we don't deserve any of that. It's about keeping our gaze on him rather than on what we're wanting. As a kid, you keep your eyes on the good things to come, so you're always excited. As an adult, you keep your eyes on getting out of what you're in. We're called to have a childlike faith. Let's keep our eyes on him, keep our eyes on the good, and search for fulfillment in him rather than escape.